I don't have the speech script on hand. President Johnson can't deliver a speech without a script. In an unexpected situation, I quickly turned the wheel and pulled into the parking lot of a convenience store I spotted. Keith? Ignoring President Johnson's panicked voice, I grabbed my laptop and USB drive from the dashboard. I'll write the script right here. Both President Johnson and his secretary, Sherry, widened their eyes in surprise at my words. My name is Keith. I'm 32 years old. And today, I'm debuting as the personal driver for an executive. It's been a few days since my department transfer. I've been thoroughly drilled in manners and driving skills. I was also warned that some of the executives can be difficult to deal with. I was confident in my driving, but I got scolded left and right for being too rough. It was really tough. Starting, stopping, turning corners, every move had to be smooth and flawless, and it took a lot of mental effort. Recently, I've finally managed to do it naturally, and today is the big day, my debut. And the first person I'm driving is none other than President Johnson himself. I was so nervous that I stood at attention, waiting for him a full 10 minutes in advance. Then, near the automatic doors, I spotted a familiar group of people, and in a panic, I rushed back to the car, sat in the driver's seat, and lowered my head. Without noticing me, they casually walked away. I slowly got out of the car and watched their backs. I'm so jealous. The words slipped out. Those people who just passed by were my former colleagues from the sales planning department. I was working hard in that same department until recently. I used to have heated discussions with my colleagues, working tirelessly for the company and our clients. But there were quite a few people who weren't happy with my methods. After some investigation and deliberation, I was transferred to become the executive driver. To me, it felt like a demotion. I was down for a few days. I thought working in sales planning was my calling, and every day had been fulfilling. I believed I was the one contributing to the company. But in the end, they decided I wasn't needed in that department anymore. I was really down, wondering what I did wrong. But, at my core, I'm a positive person. Once you hit rock bottom, the only way is up. Above all, over the past few days, learning about driving techniques and manners has been really fun and meaningful. I've gained skills that will benefit me for the rest of my life. I started to feel grateful just for that small stroke of luck. As I was lost in thought, the automatic doors opened, and the person I had been waiting for appeared. I bent at a 90-degree angle and greeted him. Starting today, I'll be serving as your driver. My name is Keith. I'm sure there will be things I'm not perfect at, but I look forward to working with you. When I introduced myself to President Johnson, he chuckled softly. There's no need to be so tense. I'm counting on you. His friendly tone eased my nerves a little. To me, President Johnson is someone way up in the clouds. He started his company when he was young, rapidly expanded it, and now owns a 20-story office building. Conducting business with numerous companies both domestically and internationally. And yet, he's still only 55 years old. It's truly impressive. Of course, I'd never spoken to him before, and the only time I'd seen him in person was during the New Year's greetings. At that time, he stood on stage with an air of authority, delivering a smooth and impressive speech. In short, he's just incredibly cool. When I relaxed a little and lifted my head, the woman who had followed behind President Johnson suddenly let out a small oops and dropped the bags she was holding all over the place. Oh no. I'm so sorry. I'll pick them up right away. She quickly crouched down, flustered, trying to gather the scattered items. I joined in to help. Oh, no, it's fine. I can do it myself. She tried to refuse, but I felt awkward just standing around without helping. No, I'm just a humble driver. I'll assist in whatever way I can. I smiled slightly as I said this, and the woman's face turned red. Then, President Johnson's laughter rang out from above. Wow, this is quite a rare sight. The woman, who I later learned was named Sherry, blushed deeply and looked down in embarrassment. I handed her the items I'd picked up, then opened the backseat door. President Johnson bowed slightly and got into the car. Sherry, following suit, also bowed and said, "Excuse me," as she got in only to bump her forehead hard against the doorframe. This time, she didn't drop anything, but the pained expression on her face said it all. President Johnson looked surprised. "What's going on, Sherry?" "Ah, Keith, this is Sherry. She's my secretary. Normally, she's very calm and competent. She's not usually like this." I swear. I nodded silently. If President Johnson says so, then she must be that kind of person. But based on my first impression, I couldn't help but think she was a bit clumsy. I pulled myself together, got into the driver's seat, and said, "We'll be leaving now. If you need anything, please don't hesitate to let me know." Before starting the car, I glanced briefly in the rearview mirror. There, I saw Sherry lightly rubbing her forehead. Indeed, when she's sitting quietly, she looks like a cool beauty. Her straight black hair is neatly styled, and her makeup is well done. She gives off an air of professionalism, though not too harsh, more like someone who takes care with her work appearance. With her sharp features and tightly pressed lips, she seems to project a reserved, distant aura. After a while, President Johnson and Sherry started talking. It seemed like they were discussing the schedule going forward. The way they talked was efficient and brisk, a complete change from her earlier clumsiness. She's got quite a strong contrast in her personality. I thought to myself as I continued driving. The next few days went by in a blur. I drove all kinds of people to various places. Some of the executives would sit in silence, while others would ask me a bunch of personal questions. But President Johnson was by far the friendliest and easiest to talk to. Every now and then, he'd bring me into the conversation. I would often respond enthusiastically, sometimes talking too much and making both President Johnson and Sherry smile wryly. Back in the sales planning department, I used to have plenty of opportunities to exchange ideas with people. So I'd been starved for that kind of interaction. When asked for my opinion, I can't help but speak up. However, President Johnson always listens intently and says, "That's an interesting perspective." I enjoyed the back and forth with him, but I secretly looked forward to seeing Sherry as well. Although Sherry had been a bit clumsy on the first day, there were no further mishaps after that, and as President Johnson had said, she proved to be a quiet, efficient secretary. When speaking with President Johnson, she was calm, almost businesslike, always sitting upright without losing her posture, even in the car. But occasionally, when our eyes met in the rearview mirror, I couldn't help but find her incredibly cute. When the three of us were casually chatting, that formal air would disappear, and she would laugh freely. "The way you drive is so smooth. It's really relaxing." When she said that, I felt like I was on cloud nine. Whenever there was a scheduled trip with President Johnson, my heart would leap. I started to feel like something special was developing between Sherry and me. A few months passed. By now, I was fully accustomed to my role as a driver. But today, there was a sense of tension in the air. It was the day of a company-hosted party. The event was also a showcase for a new system and product aimed primarily at international clients, with many overseas guests expected to attend. President Johnson was supposed to deliver a speech in English. It was such an important event that interpreters were even arranged for key domestic partners. Of course, as the driver, I wouldn't be attending, but I heard that some of the top members from the sales planning department were invited. Hearing that made me feel a little down. I wanted to be there, to talk with all the different guests. As I waited for President Johnson and Sherry, holding those thoughts, a soft voice interrupted me. "Thank you for taking care of us today." I turned to see Sherry standing there, her cheeks slightly flushed, dressed in a navy blue dress. Sherry usually wears dark color, well-tailored suits. So seeing her in a dress was a surprise. My heart skipped a beat. I'm not used to wearing this. "Does it look strange?" she asked shyly, which only made her look even cuter. I tried to keep my composure as I responded. "You look wonderful." When I smiled and said that, she gave a light, soft smile just before she stumbled. I quickly caught her. For a moment, our faces were close, and then I realized what was happening. "Oh, sorry." She immediately pulled away, her face flushed to her ears. No, I'm just glad you didn't get hurt." I stammered a bit as I spoke, while she stared at her feet. "I don't usually wear heels this high." "I'm not used to it." Indeed, she usually wears lower heels. As I was thinking about how difficult it must be for women, President Johnson appeared with a smile. Now, no flirting. Let's get going." At his sudden playful comment, both Sherry and I turned beet red. I started the car and headed for the venue. We had left early enough that we were on track to arrive with plenty of time to spare. Well then, I suppose I should practice the speech one more time. "Sherry, can you get the script?" President Johnson's relaxed voice was interrupted by Sherry's sharp, panicked tone. "Sorry?" For some reason, that sound made my heart race. "I mean, the script. I want to go over it again." President Johnson extended his hand towards Sherry. "You don't have it, President Johnson." Her voice trembled. "What? I thought you had it." I quickly intervened. "Should we turn back?" It seemed like President Johnson had forgotten the script at the office. Both he and Sherry had assumed the other had it and left without confirming. "No, we don't have time." President Johnson glanced at his watch, biting his lip. "Then maybe someone at the office could bring it to us?" I suggested, but through the rearview mirror, I saw Sherry shaking her head. "No, that won't work. All the employees attending today are heading straight from their homes." The atmosphere was getting tense, so I tried to sound as upbeat as possible. "But President Johnson, you could give an impromptu speech and..." I stopped myself. Through the rearview mirror, I could see President Johnson with his head in his hands. It's embarrassing to say, but I'm terrible at speeches. Without the script, I can't even find the words in Japanese, let alone in English. I widened my eyes in surprise at this unexpected weakness. Whenever I'd seen President Johnson give speeches, he'd always been so smooth and composed. It never seemed like he was just reading a script. I quickly swerved the car into the parking lot of a convenience store I spotted. "Keith?" Ignoring President Johnson's startled voice, I grabbed my laptop and USB drive from the dashboard. I usually used them during spare time for research or practice discussions to keep my skills sharp. We'll reach the venue in 15 minutes. Even accounting for traffic, we've got 20 minutes to spare. I'll write the speech here, and we can print it at the convenience store. We'll make it in time. Both President Johnson and Sherry looked at me, surprised. There's no way writing the speech in 20 minutes? And besides, the speech is in English. The Japanese guests will have simultaneous interpretation. But the main audience is international. Sherry started to protest, but I cut her off, looking at both her and President Johnson. Sherry, do you remember even a little of the content? And President Johnson, you said you were practicing earlier, right? If you can recall any part of it, just tell me. Sherry, visibly frustrated, shot back. It's impossible. Even with President Johnson's fluency in English, you can't write a full speech in 20 minutes. Her words irritated me. We don't have time. Just tell me what you remember. Sherry fell silent, swallowing her next words. President Johnson, in a calm tone, began recounting the key points of the speech. I typed furiously as he spoke. Oh, then how about continuing with this part after that? I suggested, and President Johnson smiled in agreement. Sherry, a bit hesitant at first, gradually joined in. Oh, right, I think it was supposed to follow with this. I see. In that case, let's move the selling point to the other section for a stronger impact. As I spoke, I kept typing rapidly into my laptop. It felt nostalgic. The tension of the situation. It reminded me of my college days, writing papers against tight deadlines. Wow, being a Harvard graduate really pays off. President Johnson's words made me chuckle, while Sherry's eyes widened in surprise. Wait. Harvard? Keith, were you really at Harvard back then? I furrowed my brows, still focused on the laptop. Back then. What did she mean by that? Though the question puzzled me, there wasn't time to dwell on it. Let's save that story for later. Right now, we need to focus. I could sense Sherry flinch a little at my abrupt tone. When I looked up suddenly, I saw her eyes filled with tears as she quietly said, "I'm sorry." So, I smiled. Please, make sure to tell me later. I won't be able to sleep at night if you don't. Sherry pressed her temples with both hands, perhaps to keep the tears from falling, and gave me a slight nod. 15 minutes later. I transferred the completed speech onto a USB drive and printed 3 copies at the convenience store. Since I typed it so quickly, there might be a few typos here and there. After a quick check, I started the car again. A few minutes later, both President Johnson and Sherry said, "It's perfect," and I felt a bit tickled by their praise. Keith, this is amazing. It's even more moving than the one I wrote. I'm a little jealous, Sherry said. I laughed. The foundation was great. We built on it together, so of course it turned out even better. President Johnson smiled at my words. You did most of the building, Keith. That praise felt genuinely rewarding. We managed to arrive at the venue safely, a little ahead of schedule. I silently appreciated the fact that the roads weren't congested. I bowed deeply to President Johnson and Sherry, saying, "Please enjoy the party. I'll be waiting here for your return." To my surprise, President Johnson handed me a paper bag. When I hesitantly accepted it, he gave me a grin. "It's your suit. Change into it and join the party." I opened my eyes wide in shock. Not as a member of the sales planning department or as a driver. I want you by my side, as my right-hand man. My mind was racing. What? What do you mean by that? As I stammered, President Johnson clapped me on the shoulder. I've been watching you for a while. You might have stood out a bit too much in the sales department. But our conversations in the car were extremely valuable to me, and the speech you wrote was exceptional. I want you to support me, starting today." I still couldn't quite grasp what was happening. But I'm only 32. In my flustered state, I forgot to show proper respect. President Johnson laughed. "I was 28 when I started this company." With that, he turned on his heel. "Well, if you're not interested, feel free to wait in the car." Panicking, I called after him, No. I'll come. Please let me join you." President Johnson raised his hand with a laugh and walked off. I rushed to the restroom, changed out of my driver's uniform, and into the suit. Even at a glance, I could tell it was a top-quality, tailored piece. He had prepared this for me in advance. He'd planned to give me this opportunity. The thought moved me so much that I nearly shed tears. The party ended in great success. Especially during President Johnson's English speech, the applause was thunderous. It seemed that President Johnson made it clear to everyone at the venue exactly how our company plans to expand its business and the purpose behind it. Throughout the entire party, I followed President Johnson, talking to various people and making valuable connections. It was a deeply fulfilling and meaningful experience. After the party, I was supposed to change back into my driver's uniform and drive President Johnson and Sherry home. However, President Johnson said, "I'll be dragged to the second and third parties. Take Sherry home for me. No need to change back." I wanted to accompany him to those after parties, but my job was still to drive, and getting Sherry home was my responsibility. Grateful for President Johnson's permission to stay in my suit, I started the car. "Shall I take you to the office?" President Johnson said I could take you home if you'd prefer, I asked Sherry. She hesitated for a moment before giving me her address, saying, "It's a bit far, but would that be all right?" It seemed like it would take about 40 minutes from here, but it wasn't that far. As I drove leisurely, I decided to ask something that had been on my mind. "So, since we have some time, could you tell me more about what you mentioned earlier?" At my words, Sherry flinched slightly, her shoulders trembling. "The thing from earlier." "Oh, right. You're talking about when I said, 'Did you attend Harvard back then?'" I nodded. "Actually, when I was on a tour trip to the US, you helped me out once, Keith." When she said that, memories of my time living in the US came flooding back. During some free time on the tour, I wandered off by myself, exploring different places, and ended up, somehow, in a back alley. That's when two American guys approached her. Back then, Sherry couldn't speak English fluently, so she was bewildered by their rapid speech, her eyes darting nervously. Apparently, I was the one who intervened and stopped those two men. Wait. I kind of remember helping a Japanese girl, but I don't quite recall the details. I think she was small, looked nervous, and kind of had a soft, gentle vibe. As I hesitated, Sherry let out a soft laugh. At a red light, she handed me a photo. "Wasn't this the girl?" Looking at the picture, I nodded firmly. A soft, flowing dress, and similarly soft, wavy hair. She was petite, nervous, and so cute that if someone had spoken to her forcefully, she'd likely nod and agree without hesitation. That was me. As she said that, I stared at the photo. Of course, since Sherry handed it to me, I knew it must be her in the picture. But I thought, though I expected it, she looked completely different from now. Sherry giggled quietly. "Actually, that's the real me. I love soft, cute things, and I'm a bit clumsy too." Her cheeks flushed as she said that, making her look even more adorable. When I joined the company and got assigned to the secretary department, I went through some really strict training, and this is how I ended up. Even though she said like this, today Sherry was wearing a party dress, her hair tied neatly to the side with a hair accessory. Her usual look was a business suit, with her hair tightly pulled back into a ponytail with just a plain black tie. That must be the version of her shaped by her secretary department training. But we really parted ways right after that, didn't we? Even when I offered to walk you back since it seemed dangerous, you shook your head. Since you said you were with a tour, I figured if I just showed you to the main street, it'd be safe enough, so we parted there. But how did you remember me? I recall thinking at the time that maybe I should have escorted her back to the tour guide, and I regretted being so careless. So the event stuck with me. Blushing bright red, Sherry handed me another photo as we stopped at the next red light. What? I was utterly shocked when I looked at the picture. It was a photo of me browsing through some items at a street stall. Sherry shrank a bit, her face flushed red with embarrassment. I'm sorry, but you looked so cool that after we parted, I kind of secretly took this photo. She explained that she had kept it like a lucky charm ever since. It wasn't like I was desperate to see you again. Oh. I mean, I did want to see you again, but it was more like, you know how people carry around pictures of their favorite idols? It was kind of like that. Do you get it? Honestly, I didn't get it at all. I mean, maybe in her anxious state in a foreign country she exaggerated her memory of me, but there was no way I, with my plain looks, could ever be idol material. The person I had been staring at in that photo suddenly showed up as my driver. I got so nervous and flustered that I probably showed you nothing but embarrassing sides of me the whole day. As she said this, I remembered the day we met. Now that I think about it, her face did seem a bit flushed back then. Knowing she had all this going on behind the scenes, I felt a sudden rush of affection for her. And today, you finished that amazing manuscript in no time. When I heard you hone those skills at Harvard, I thought you were really incredible. Like you're completely out of my league. I panicked. Wait, what? You're just idealizing me again. I'm just some guy who got demoted from the planning department and ended up as a driver, you know? But Sherry gently shook her head in response. No. It's just that you were too talented for our planning and sales department to handle. Even through the rearview mirror, her serious gaze made my heart race. There was a time when President Johnson looked confused. He said, I think he's a real asset, but we're not sure how to utilize him. When he asked what to do, I suggested, why don't you keep him close? And then, with a smile I'd never seen from him before, he said, you're right. He was talking about you. Though he said you're right, nothing seemed to change around President Johnson. The only real difference was that I had been reassigned as his driver. I had been a bit suspicious about that. I think he moved you to the driver position because it gave you more opportunities to talk to him. President Johnson seemed so lively whenever you two were in the car together. Hearing that, I felt a warmth spread through my chest. And seeing you standing next to President Johnson at the party tonight, you looked so cool. I know it might be presumptuous of me, but I want to stand next to you too, Keith. My heart pounded. I kept telling myself not to get the wrong idea. I mean, I'd love to believe that, but isn't it just that you're idealizing me because I helped you out when you were scared in a foreign country? I mumbled my thoughts awkwardly. There was silence, and when I nervously glanced in the rearview mirror, I saw Sherry quietly shedding tears. Panicking, I pulled into a nearby parking lot. I didn't care how much the parking fee would be. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to make you cry. It's just, I'm insecure. I mean, I don't have enough confidence to believe someone as beautiful as you could really like me. I'm afraid you'd just realize it was a mistake and dump me. I reached back and handed her a handkerchief. But instead of taking it, Sherry grabbed my hand firmly. What? When I looked at her, confused, she pressed the handkerchief to her lips and whispered, in a tearful voice, "Then, why don't you test me? Test whether I'm really the kind of woman who'd just dismiss this as a mistake. Date me, and find out." For a moment, the thought crossed my mind that if it was a mistake, I'd end up heartbroken. But I decided to stop overthinking it. If you're okay with someone like me, I'd be happy to, I muttered softly, and Sherry burst out laughing. You graduated from Harvard, President Johnson trusts you, you have so many amazing qualities, and yet you have no confidence? That's strange. I was confident in my work and my principles, but when it came to my looks, I'd never been secure. Especially when it came to relationships. Still, I had a feeling that this might be my last love. And years later, that feeling proved to be right. Sherry and I got married, and now we live in the United States. After several years working as President Johnson's right-hand man, I was appointed president of the company he expanded overseas. Our kids, who are now in elementary school, came along with us. They cried about leaving their friends in Japan, but once we arrived, they managed to make new friends, chatting and playing with their imperfect English. I also lived in the US when I was a kid because of my parents' work. That's when I first dreamed of going to Harvard. As I watched the kids play, I shared my thoughts, and Sherry's eyes widened in surprise. Oh my! What if our kids end up wanting to go to Harvard too? I chuckled. No matter what dreams they have, I'd like to help them make it happen. At that, Sherry smiled warmly. You're right, sometimes dreams can come true if you don't give up. She winked playfully at me. I gave a small smile and took her hand in mine. Our meeting again, it was fate, wasn't it? With that, I gently kissed her forehead. I looked over at our kids playing in the living room. I wondered what kinds of dreams they'd have, and how they'd achieve them. Sherry and I still had plenty of dreams of our own, and we were just getting started. How many more dreams can we fulfill in this lifetime? Thinking about that, I tightly held Sherry's hand.